Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill were British philosophers who also made contributions to economics. Jeremy Bentham was the founder of utilitarianism, a philosophy of ethics, a philosophy about what is right and wrong, which taught that an action is right if it promotes the most happiness for the largest number of people. Bentham's theory of ethics is based on the idea that it is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is a measure of right and wrong. Therefore, actions are right or wrong according to the consequences they have on the happiness of other people. John Stuart Mill furthered Bentham's ideas by blending them with human rights, including the rights of minorities and women. He was a fervent believer in human freedom and was opposed to forcing people to do things against their will. Mill's theory of ethics can be summarized in his statement that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. The idea of the greatest happiness is based on the concept of utility, which Bentham defined to be that property in any object whereby it tends to produce benefit, advantage, pleasure, good, or happiness, or to prevent the happening of mischief, pain, evil, or unhappiness. Similarly, Mill defines happiness as pleasure and the absence of pain. That is a very, very important concept to know. Then we'll talk about concept of margin. This is very, very important. Classical economists were concerned about the concept of value, specifically what gives things their value and what determines their price. One theory that was popular at the time was the labor theory of value, according to which the price of a good was determined by the quantity of labor that was necessary to produce it. It so happened that three economists working independently of each other came to use the concept of utility in order to arrive at a theory of how prices are determined. They were Stanley Jevons, Carl Menger, and Leon Walras. Although they differed widely in the methods they used, they all agreed on two fundamental points. This is very important. Please note this down. Oh, we are not trying to look at Marxism or Keynesian revolution yet. What's going on? Yes, the concept of utility we're focusing here, or satisfaction or pleasure derived from consuming something, is central to an idea of value that helps determine prices. And what matters is not the total utility of consuming something, but rather the extra or additional utility of consuming one more unit of the good, known as a marginal utility. That is a cost or price of consuming or producing one more of the product. Now, as our last part of this lesson, we will go over Karl Marx. Actually, we will also cover Keynesian. Karl Marx was a German philosopher. Now, this is a Marxist critic of classical economics. Karl Marx was a German philosopher who had a profound influence on the course of global events during the 20th century, as many of his ideas formed the ideological basis for the establishment of communist regimes around the world. In addition to being a philosopher, Marx was an economist, historian, political theorist, sociologist, and linguist. Marx produced, yes, something's wrong with this. Marx produced a huge amount of written work, but perhaps the best known in his book Capital, Critique of Political Economy, for short, Das Kapital in German, which was written over 18 years. In this book, Marx presented what he considered to be a scientific account of the laws of capitalist development, which would eventually result in the downfall of capitalism. Capitalism is a free market system based on private ownership of the means of production and driven by the desire to make profits. Marx's analysis is based on a version of the labor theory of value, which, as noted earlier, was a standard explanation of value in the 19th century until the appearance of marginal analysis. The value of a good was determined by the amount of labor that was used to produce it. However, Marx observed that the price actually paid for a good was usually far greater than the labor of value that was put into producing it. measured by the wages paid to labor. The difference between the two, or the price of the good minus the value of labor to produce it, was termed surplus value by Marx and corresponded to profit made by the owners of the factories. Surplus value represented exploitation of workers by the owners of factories. The factory owners had an incentive to pay workers as little as possible, forcing them to work under appalling conditions so that they could make them surplus values, hence their profits as large as possible. It is beyond doubt that conditions in 19th century factories in England, where Marx was living at the time, were truly appalling, as the writings of authors such as Charles Dickens clearly show. As a historian, Marx saw economic systems being transformed over time in a particular order. Feudalism had been replaced by capitalism, and according to the historical laws he claimed to have discovered, capitalism was going to be replaced in the future by communism. This would happen because of the innate instability of capitalism. Competition would force capitalists, the owners of factories, to keep investing in new machinery in order to reduce labor costs and hence beat their competitors. But by using machines in place of labor, the capitalists would reduce the surplus value of labor that gave rise to their profits. Therefore, the result would be declining profits for the capitalists. At the same time that capitalist profits were expected to fall, workers would become increasingly unemployed and poverty-stricken as they were replaced by more machines. Workers were expected to become more and more pitted against capitalists. The capitalist system would eventually be overthrown to be replaced by communism, where the means of production, the factors would be owned collectively by the people. Marx at any time described his visions of communism in a systematic way, but it is clear from his writings that the systems that came into being in the 20th century were not based on his ideas. His predictions have not materialized since capitalist profits do not appear to be falling. While capitalism does periodically undergo crisis, such as the Great Depression of the 1930s and the global financial crisis of 2008, it does not appear to be on the verge of collapse. Communist systems that came into being in the 20th century were not the result of capitalism's collapse, but rather the result of force. Yet Marx continues to be highly influential because he had keen insights into the workings of capitalism, which are still highly relevant today. These include the recurrence of crises, which is similar to what is known as today as a business cycle, the impoverishment of the middle class as income inequalities grow rapidly, the lack of growth in real wages over decades in many developed countries related to the growth in income inequalities, increasing job insecurities, and the risks of growing unemployment due to rapid technological change. Moreover, Marx has had a profound influence in other social sciences, including sociology. Okay, we don't need to read that. Well, we don't need to read that. Let's read the yellow bubble. Karl Marx developed a theory according to which capitalism would be eventually replaced by communism because of the market system's internal contradictions that would lead to its collapse. While this has not materialized, Marx is still highly regarded for his numerous insights into how capitalism works. Now, the last concept that we'll cover today in this lesson is the 20th century Keynesian revolution. John Maynard Keynes, the British economist whose theories replaced classical economies, author of the General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, General Theory for short. It was noted earlier that in the 19th century, it was believed that in accordance with Say's law, supply creates its own demand. In this way of thinking, it was not possible to have extended periods of unemployment. Therefore, when the Great Depression of the 1930s occurred, bringing with it very significant declines in output along with high unemployment in many countries, economists were at a loss to explain how this had occurred. John Maynard Keynes, an extremely influential British economist, set forth an economic theory that entirely replaced the classical theory in Say's law. Keynes is best known for his book, The General Theory. Keynes argued that the state of full employment in an economy was only a special case that cannot occur all the time. If spending decreased, there was nothing to ensure that an economy would return to a situation of full employment on its own. Classical economists thought that if overall demand decreased, and there was a fall in spending, then prices will fall, which will cause spending to increase again. So output and employment will once again go to the full employment level. Also, classical economists thought that if there was a decrease in spending so that the output fell, then there would be some temporary unemployment that would cause wages to fall, making employers increase the number of workers they hire. This would also bring employment back up to the full employment level once again. But according to Keynes, wages were sticky, meaning that they could not fall easily. In addition, falling wages meant that workers would have less money to spend, which would cause overall demand and spending to fall further. But sticky wages meant sticky prices because producers could not lower their prices if they had to go on paying the same level of wages. As a result, the economic system could not go on its own, go back to full employment. Now, here's the important part. Keynes argued that a situation like this requires government intervention in the form of increased government spending, which would give the economy the push it needed to get it going again. Using the idea of the multiplier, the Keynesian multiplier, he showed that if the government increased its own spending on such things as buildings, roads, or schools, there would be a multiplied spending effect in the economy. This would help the economy to get out of its state of low output and unemployment. Keynes thoroughly dismissed the laissez-faire economy of the 19th century and provided a justification for the government intervention that is urgently needed to avoid prolonged recessions and high unemployment. We will discuss Keynes' contribution in Chapter 9. Now, to cover the macroeconomic policy and monetarist and neoclassical counter-revolution, time is a little short, so we will end our class today here. However, these concepts that we covered, the 20th century, 19th century, Karl Marx, Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, very important figures in the base of economics, and we needed to cover these their ideologies to further advance our knowledge. So thank you for listening today, and I'll see you in the next lesson.